Hello. I wanted to share one of my favorite poems, if not my favorite poem, and that is The Sheep Child, written by James Dickey, who is a prominent author in the 60s, 70s, had a pretty long career. He was also a screenwriter. If you Google James Dickey, you'll figure out what movies he wrote, and one of them is pretty famous for being a commentary on, let's say, your stereotypes of country people, of people who live in, far out places by themselves, isolationists, etc. People who grow up in the country. And that movie, the movie's Deliverance. So you may or may not know that one. But like I said, it's pretty famous for being about rural stereotypes and so forth. But Dickey was also a poet, a very accomplished one, and he has a poem called The Sheep Child, which deals with this same kind of stereotypical boogeyman kind of lore. And this is one of the things that I really like about his work. I'll talk more about that here in a minute. Let me read you the poem, and then if you want to keep listening, I'm going to go into why this poem is one of my favorites as someone who grew up in rural areas, someone who carried a lot of shame about where she was from, and how something like this does not talk down to you if you are from a similar background, and how it's playing with the grotesqueness, because myself and a lot of people I know who come from a rural background often have a sense of shame due to a lot of stereotypes that are out there. So more on that here in a minute. The Sheep Child by James Dickey. Farm boys wild to couple with anything, with soft wooded trees, with mounds of earth, mounds of pine straw, will keep themselves off animals by legends of their own. In the hay tunnel dark and dung of barns, they will say, I have heard tell that in a museum in Atlanta, way back in a corner somewhere, there's this thing that's only half sheep, like a woolly baby pickled in alcohol, because those things can't live. His eyes are open, but you can't stand to look. I heard from somebody who... But this is now almost all gone. The boys have taken their own true wives in the city. The sheep are safe in the West Hill pasture. But we who were born there still are not sure. Are we? Because we remembered in the terrible dust of museums. Merely with his eyes, the sheep child may be saying, I am here in my Father's house. I, who am half of your world, came deeply to my mother in the long grass of the west pasture, where she stood like moonlight listening for foxes. It was something like love from another world that seized her from behind, and she gave, not lifting her head out of dew without ever looking, her best self to that great need. Turned loose, she dipped her face farther into the chill of the earth, and in a sound of sobbing, of something stumbling away, began as she must do to carry me. I woke dying in the summer sun of the hillside, with my eyes far more than human. I saw for a blazing moment that great grassy world from both sides, man and beast in the round of their need, and the hill wind stirred in my wool. My hoof and my hand clasped together. I ate one meal of milk and died staring. From dark grass I came straight to my father's house, whose dust whirls up in the halls for no reason. When no one comes, piling deep in a hellish mild corner, and through my immortal waters I meet the sun's grains eye to eye, and they fail at my closet of glass. Dead, I am most surely living in the minds of farm boys. I am he who drives them like wolves from the hound bitch and calf, and from the chaste ewe in the wind. They go into woods, into bean fields they go, deep into their known right hands, dreaming of me. They groan, they wait, they suffer themselves, they marry, they raise their kind. So, you might not have been prepared for what this poem was about. But if you have any kind of connection to rural areas, if you are someone who's from a rural area and you grew up among certain people, there is this discussion of coupling with animals, with loneliness, with being just a degenerate, idiot farm person who, is inbred, etc. This sort of discussion is something, at least when I was growing up, was something that, people would throw at you. If you watch a lot of cinema, you'll probably come across things like that, where if the hillbilly character shows up, there's often some comedy made at their expense for this sort of thing. So I think what's remarkable about this poem and about a lot of Dickey's work is this balance that he has. There is clearly an affection for his roots, for this sort of life, that is, rural existence, farming, raising cattle, etc., or sheep in this instance. There's clearly an affection there. But he is also not romanticizing this in the way that you would hear in like a country music song from the past 10 years, where they take those qualities and almost it seems like they're fighting against these stereotypes that people use to make fun of them. But often they lean into, in my opinion, the wrong sorts of things, because there is, to me, a denial in modern country music when it comes to discussing this sort of life, where everything seems great. It's, going back to God's country, etc. And while there are things to love about that life, and there are people who genuinely do love that life, there is a grotesqueness to it. If you have ever worked with animals, you know that death is a big part of that life. You have to see things that you never wanted to see. You have to assist in such things. We had cattle where I grew up, and I have a lot of memories of having to watch mothers slowly die while their calf is hanging out of them because they couldn't complete the birth. And, such grotesqueries, and apologies for this image, but such, imagery that's stuck in my head is my father using a tractor and tying a large log chain around the calf to extract it from its mother because there was no other way to do it. And, I won't go into more detail than that, but, there are certainly things I liked about growing up in a rural area, but there is certainly a hatred, an aggression that goes against any kind of romanticizing for it. And if there's one thing that I admire in an author or an artist is honesty. And James Dickey's poem is very honest. Farm children are often left by themselves. They are often, they do work all day. I was working in the fields since I was probably like, I don't know, 12 years old maybe. I was driving tractors long before I should have been driving machinery. And you learn to find your community in people of your age if you have them around. I had brothers I could do this with. I didn't have any neighbor friends. But there's this honesty about how lonely that existence is and how easily it can become something that you never want to think about again. As someone who, let's say, escaped the country as soon as she could, I find it offensive to hear and see this kind of folksy presentation of that life. This false sense that, this is, let's keep it in the States, this is America, this is the kind of thing that, is the backbone of our country and so forth. And maybe some of that work is, and maybe there is a reward in that. But if you grow up in that environment, there's often a lot of drawback to it. There's lots of things that can make you, that can scar you. And I love in The Sheep Child, and just to break it down a little bit, that first section is very much talking about the lore, right? About this idea that farm boys are so lonely that they hook up with whatever is nearby, and it's not people. And there's a sense of humor to it as well, because if you grow up with that kind of stereotype hanging over you, it's very similar to me in who I am, and there's lots of stereotypes thrown at me, and I have to turn those things into jokes to survive them. I have to make to pull out a sense of humor from these things that can be destructive. And Dickey leans into this humor. So the first portion is this discussion about how farm boys are terrified that if one of them did something like this in their youth, that there might be evidence of it. The sheep child itself. And there's this lore that, to me, this poem is, it is a horror story. There is a madness to it. There is a monster in it, right? And the first half is discussing this monster and its dead, appearance in a pickled jar and so forth. The second half, and I can't help but think of Frankenstein a little bit here, because if you've read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the book, you know that Frankenstein gets a lot of talk. He's a chatty dude, and this poem gives us that lore first, and then it switches to a monologue by this dead creation and this thing that should not exist, this thing that can exist, of course. Um, at least let's hope not. But and it's presented so eloquently, same as Frankenstein's monster. Sorry, I know Frankenstein's monster is what I meant to say. Who is also eloquent in the book. And here you have this you have these heartbreaking lines of a life that is gone, that never had a chance. The sheep child says, I ate my one meal of milk and died, staring. From dark grass I came straight to my father's house, whose dust whirls up in the halls for no reason, when no one comes, piling deep in a hellish, mild corner. You have this spirit, let's say, looking back at its extremely short and cursed life. And for some of us who grew up in these areas, there is this aspect of thinking that you will never, ever escape this, that this is all life is. There's a reason why there are extremely high self-harm rates in rural areas. You can Google that and see the statistics yourself. There's a reason why if you drive through certain areas in the country, you will see billboards for helplines to call, because it is very common. And, I am someone who struggled with self-harm myself in those areas. And you get this sense that this child, is looking back on this life that briefly existed. And if you were young and you were isolated, that might ring true to you. You might think that you are going to die, and soon, and you're never going to marry that city girl or boy or person, whatever. And it's such a tragedy and heart-wrenching poem that begins as based off a joke about what farm boys do because they're so backwards, etc. And the poem moves in this direction that you don't expect. And I love the poem for that. And what I wanted to tie this up with is this discussion of how we see areas like this. How do you talk about your homeland? How do you talk about where you're from? If there is a sense of shame to it, and every location has its own sort of culture in that aspect, where there's something, the people who grow up there hate, they dislike, but what I appreciate about this is the honesty. It is the presentation of this existence as something that is painful, something that is both absurd. There's an absurdity to this poem, surely. And, I'm drawn to this sort of thing. I feel like if there's a reason why I'm wearing this Drive-By Truckers t-shirt. If you've ever heard this band, it's a modern American rock band from Athens. They are very much into these stories about where they're from, this lore, and they don't romanticize it. They go into the grotesqueness of it. They talk about, different aspects of racism and sexism and destruction and so forth that are tied to their roots. And you don't see a lot of that. The author, Daniel Woodrell, who I haven't read in a long time, but He wrote a novel called Winter's Bone that was turned into a movie that was actually about where I'm from, the Ozarks. And I admire his work because it presents that same kind of no nonsense, unfiltered look at what that sort of existence is like. So, if you like poetry or writing that presents things in a unique way, a truthful way, I highly recommend The Sheep Child by James Dickey. He has a lot of works. This is a from a new and selected, or just a complete. I think that these are all of his poetry books. Check his stuff out. You know, if you're content listening to Luke Bryan sing about fishing or whoever, instead of like issues that come up or things that people struggle with, and of course that's if that's what you like. But if you're looking for something that talks about rural life in a way that is honest and unique, check out James Dickey. Thanks for listening.